Yes, students. Good afternoon, students. Yes, so students, we're gonna continue where we would have stopped last week, looking at the human skeletal system. Now, as to the exact subtopic that we will be looking at today, we're gonna look at the different types of joints. Because we would have already looked at the skeletal system itself, would have looked at the different types of tissues that make up the human skeletal system, and of course those include cartilage, bone, muscle, tendons, and ligaments. Would have also looked at how movement take place at a particular joint, where would have spent extended period of time looking at the movement at the elbow joint, where extension and flexion take place. So joints, now generally speaking, the definition for joint is normally a place where two or more bones meet. Therefore one bone cannot form a joint. So as you can see for the first pointer, a joint is formed whenever two or more different bones meet. For example, on the diagram that you're seeing there, the image is actually showing a joint that is being formed at the hip region there of the human body. So other places on the body where we can locate joints, for example, the knee, the elbow, the wrist, the ankle. So those are places where you have at least two bones meeting in order to form that particular joint. Now the fact that a joint is wherever you find two or more bones meet, now those bones, something need to actually hold them together or hold them in place, and that's where the ligament come into play again. So at joints, ligaments are very important because they are what hold the bones together at that particular joint. The second pointer, movement occurs in many different planes. Now as for this purpose, in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the skeletal system, once you see the word or the term planes, they are talking about direction. So rather than using the word direction, we actually use the term planes. So movement occurs in many different planes, and to make this possible, the bones must be joined to each other in different ways. So in terms of the different types of joints, the reason why we have different types of joints is because as for the human skeletal system, different joints need to move in different direction. So all joints don't necessarily mean that they actually move in the same direction. As for the types of joints, we have two main types of joints, or two main categories that we're going to look at. The first one is fixed joints. Now, fixed joints. All right, I'm seeing somebody holding up there. Yes, yes, Parks. The first part. Okay. Well, remember that I send the notes, so if you are not able to complete it, you can finish and write the notes in there. I send it in the WhatsApp, and I'm also gonna post it on the Google platform. Oh, no problem. Right. So as I said, we're looking at joints, and as the word joints suggests, that simply mean two or more things must come together. Now they are saying, as for the definition for joint, it is normally formed whenever you have two or more bones meet, meaning that those two bones, they must be different. So in the wrist region, for example, that joint is formed by approximately 26 different bones. So yeah, they actually have some extremely tiny bones forming that wrist joint right there. At the elbow joint, for example, is formed by three different bones, and those bones are the radius, the ulna, and of course the humerus. So different bones form, I should say that different joints have different number of bones in terms of how many bones form that particular joint. Now, as for the second pointer, it is basically telling you that the fact that we have different joints mean that all those different joints, they don't allow movement in the same direction. So you will realize that the type of movement that you get at the elbow joint is completely different from the type of movement you get at the shoulder joint. And that is because those two joints, they are different in terms of the types. Now the elbow joint is called a hinge joint, while the joint in the shoulder, it is called a ball and socket. So the difference between a hinge joint and a ball and socket is that the ball and socket joint, which is the joint at the shoulder, it allows movement in all direction. Therefore, you can actually rotate that shoulder. So if you realize you can move the shoulder joint in all different direction, but as for the elbow, you can only open and close the elbow like a door. That is simple because the elbow joint is called a hinge joint, which simply means that it only allows movement in one plane or one direction.
Sir, you said there is a very important
Oh, ligaments, right? So ligaments very important tissue that hold the bones together at joints, because something need to keep them in place. You're not just gonna have the bones joining together and stay in place. Something must keep them in place, and that's where ligament come into play. Where ligament normally join bone to bone at joints, which you would have gotten information on ligaments from last class. Alright, so after looking at the overview for joints, now we're going to look at the different types of joints. Now, as for types, we have two main categories, or two main types. One is known as fixed joint, or you can say immovable. That means that these joints, they don't allow movement. And the next category of a joint that we're going to spend some time looking at is what is known as synovial joints or movable joints. So those are the two types of joints. So as for fixed joint, they are formed where bones are not meant to move. So we have some joints in the human body where those joints, they don't actually move. That simply means that they are known as immovable joints. And examples of those are joints that make up the skull. So the joints that make up the skull, for example, they are known as immovable joints. That means that these joints, they are not meant to move. So for example, here you have a diagram of the skull. So basically these are joints. So as you can see, we have different bones that make up the skull. Now these joints, they don't move, simply because the brain is a very important organ, and you don't want the brain to be exposed to things within the environment that can struck it, for example, and damage it. So these are examples of joints that are called fixed joints. Now the second point is giving you the name of the joints that are within the human skull. Now the joints, they are known as sutures. So the sutures of the skull is made up of several bones which fuse together in the early years of life. So that simply means that these joints, they basically fuse together, meaning that they are joined extremely close, simply because no movement should take place at these joints because of the importance or the sensitivity of the human brain. So this is important so that the skull provides strong protection for the brain. Right, so an example of fixed joint in the human body would be the sutures of the skull. So that is if you're asked that question to Give me an example of somewhere in the human body where you can find fixed joint, and that location would be in the skull. And I can ask you to give me the name of the joints of the skull, and that is when you will tell me that it is the sutures. Other question I can develop from this concept is for you to give me the importance of these joints being fixed joint. The joint, the name. What is the name of the joint in the skull? All right, the name of the joints found in the skull, and that would be the sutures. And you have the question as for location.
No, sir.
Alright, that question is give me an example of a location in the human body where you can find a fixed joint. So location.
We can write that with those questions right after the second
Slide.
Yes.
Yes, you can write the question anywhere in the notes. You can write the question between the notes. It does not matter where you write the question. Right, the question is examples example on the human body where you can find a fixed joint. So example of a location on the human body. No problem. Yes, you can shorten the question. No problem. Right, the question, it does not matter how you phrase the question. Once you know the concept, then there is no problem in terms of how you phrase the question. Right, and that location would be in the skull. And another question I was mentioning is the importance of the sutures being fixed joint. So the importance of the sutures being fixed joint, or you can say the importance of fixed joint in the skull. Why is it important that the joints of the skull are fixed? Why is it important that the joints of the skull are fixed? And the answer for that is to provide protection for the brain. To provide protection for the brain. All right, so as I said, for that slide, as you can see the heading, types of joints. So fixed joint would be actually one. So in terms of fixed joints, we don't have different categories of fixed joint. It is just one type of fixed joint we have. So moving down to the next type of joint. Now these joints are known as synovial joints, or you can say movable joints. Now the fixed joints, you can also call them immovable. So just a change of term. Now as for synovial joints, we have different types. We have different types of synovial joints. For example, we have ball and socket, we have hinge joint, we have gliding joint, we have pivot joint. So those are four different types of synovial or movable joints. So again, in terms of arm joints, don't mix up the different categories. Once you're looking at joints, we have two main types, and the two main types are fixed. That is one. As for the amount of different categories or different types of fixed joint, we only have one. So as you can see on that slide, I don't have different types of fixed joint. I only have fixed joints and that's it. So we only have one type of fixed joint. But once we're looking at synovial joints or movable joints, now this is where we have different types of synovial joints, and we're going to look at 4 different types of synovial joints, and they are named ball and socket, hinge joints, gliding joint, and pivot joints. So we're gonna look at those 4 individually. But before we look at those 4 joints individually, we're going to spend some time looking at the features of synovial joints or movable joints, because the fact that they are able to move simply mean that they're going to have some different component or some different things that are completely different from the fixed joint, meaning that you will not find these substances or these structures within a fixed joint. So that is why we have to look at these features. So these features are basically ideal, or you'll only find them in synovial or movable joints, meaning that you're not going to find these features in a fixed joint, for example. So freely movable joints are called synovial joints. So for example, the joint at the elbow, the joint at the knee, once they can move freely, once they can move easily, then we normally refer to them as synovial joints. All of the same basic structures. So in terms of cartilage, for example, so on the slide here you're seeing the cartilage, which is the clearer blue section there. So what they are saying, at the ends of bones where you have a movable joint, once the joint is movable, then you will find cartilage there. And it is very important that cartilage are found at movable joints, simply because these bones are going to actually rub against each other slightly. Now the fact that they are rubbing against each other means that something that is called friction is taking place. So the fact that the cartilage it is slippery, then that simply means that it actually reduces friction. And next importance or reason why the cartilage is located at the joint there is to absorb what is known as shocks. So it actually reduces the amount of vibration, it reduces the amount of weight that the ends of the bones will actually bear. Let's say for example you're walking on the knee joint and the ankle joint under a lot of pressure in terms of the human body weight. The third pointer there, the ligaments hold the bone firmly together. Right, I would have mentioned that at the start of the class, that the bones that form a joint, they don't just sit at the joint like that. Something need to hold them or keep them firmly in place so that they don't move out of place. And that is where ligament come into play. Now, whenever somebody is involved in an accident or then drop or something, and you hear them say their shoulder slip out or their knee slip out, now the reason for that is simply because the ligament would have been damaged or torn. So once the ligament damaged, then the bone is going to fall out of place. So most of the time whenever somebody
Sir, wait a second.
yes,
May I write where just
which part you writing? What you want me to?
I'm writing once ligament is out of
Okay.
the joint, they will not move.
Which one? Which explanation? The one about when the
It's mainly ligament. When I say when you out of place, did I tear?
okay. Oh no, either it tear or it damaged. So either a completed tear or it is damaged somewhat. Right. So when the shoulder slip out or the knee slip out, it means a ligament tear. Because remember that it is the ligament that hold the bones in place, So once that ligament is torn, then there is nothing to hold the bone in place again. So that's why we normally say that the bone slip out. Excuse me a second, I'm going to step away from the computer for a second. Right. So once a joint is deemed to be synovial joint or movable joint, then these three pointers basically are applied to that particular joint. So once they are synovial, they should be freely movable, and they should have basic structure such as ligament at that particular joint. So continuing in terms of the special features that should be at synovial joint, the surfaces of the bones are covered in cartilage. So when looking at the image in terms of the cartilage is the white section at the end of the bone there. Now this joint, repeat, and not hearing it. The question, which one of the question? The question read when your foot shoulder slip out. I'm not sure. Yes.
This is saying that when cartilage is present, the bone, not bone, the joint will be able to move okay, right? This cartilage, right?
Yes, when you have cartilage present at the joint, it allow a much freer movement because the cartilage is slippery, because it reduces what is called friction. So if the cartilage is damaged or as persons get older, from adulthood getting older, then the cartilage normally worn out. Now once the cartilage wear out, then those persons they will experience pain once they try to move a particular joint. So and they hardly can move those joints some of the time because of the amount of pain that they're feeling, and that is simply because the bones are literally rubbing against each other now. And the fact that the end of the bones normally have some nerves there, so that's why they normally feel those pain. Alright, so continuing with the features. So the cartilage are very smooth to reduce what is called friction and to absorb shock. So from that second pointer down, that second pointer basically give you the two functions of cartilage. So cartilage basically has two functions. One is to reduce friction, and the second one is to absorb shocks. So the second pointer giving you the two functions for cartilage, because I'm quite sure that I will be asking you that question in terms of you to give me the two functions. The question, what are the two functions of James? You're kind of chipping in and out. I don't know if this is a question you're asking. The two functions for cartilage. What are the two functions for cartilage? Yes, so what are the two functions for cartilage? One of the functions is to reduce friction, and the next function is to absorb shocks. So pointer number 2 is where that information is. So the two functions for cartilage, 1 is to reduce friction and 2 is to absorb shocks. What I mean by absorb shocks is that whenever you're walking, for example, the ankle joint and the knee joint, those two joints, they actually feel a whole lot of vibration and a whole lot of weight because of the upper body weight. Now, just like a motor vehicle, whenever the motor vehicle dropping a one pothole, once the shocks for that motor vehicle is good, then you're not gonna feel it a lot. But if the shocks, if they are bad, then you literally feel the car wheel lick up on the body of the car, and it actually jerk you. Now the same thing actually happen to the human body in terms of your ankle joint and your knee joint. But once your cartilage, once they are working properly, once they are healthy, then you're not going to feel any pain in terms of the vibration as for absorbing the shock. That is because they will be able to absorb the shocks. Now, as for older persons, where their cartilage basically worn out. Now those persons normally feel pain whenever they try to walk. So they ball for their knee. Every minute you see them a sap their knee. Every minute you see them a sap their ankle. That is because their cartilage they are worn out and then can't absorb the shock anymore. Hence they are feeling a lot of pain. The third pointer, the synovial membrane produces the fluid, produces the synovial fluid. So that's why these joints, that's why they are called synovial joints, because there's a section on it that is known as the synovial membrane. And this slide you're seeing the labeling for the synovial membrane, which is the brighter brown section there. So that is known as the synovial membrane. So the synovial membrane produces a fluid, and that fluid is known as the synovial fluid. So this fluid actually lubricate the joints, allow some form of lubricant or something watery to be within that region there. So that fluid helps to reduce friction. So our next question I can ask is what are the two features of a synovial joint that reduce friction? So what are the two features of a synovial joint which reduce friction? So the next question, what are the two features of synovial joint which reduce friction or which help to reduce friction? So the two features of a synovial joint which help to reduce friction. So the question,
Sir, what's the answer?
the answer, the presence of cartilage and synovial fluid. So the
Sir,
Sir, wait, sir. We need to keep the question in the
uh, all right, the question, what are the two features of a synovial joint which help to reduce friction? What are the two features of a synovial joint which help to reduce friction?
Okay, sir.
Right, and the two features are the present, just right, synovial fluid and cartilage. Those are the two features. So the presence of synovial fluid and cartilage. Right, so the last point is saying that synovial fluid serves as a lubricant which help to reduce friction. So lubricant is what basically lubricate or reduce friction, where you have two different things rubbing against each other. Right, so we would have just completed the special features that make synovial joints movable. And as I said, those features that we just looked at as for fixed joints, for example, the sutures of the skull, you will not find these features because the joints of the skull, they were not meant to move. So you're not going to find any cartilage, you're not going to find any synovial fluid, synovial membrane, you're not going to find any ligament, simply because those joints, they were not meant to move. So now we're going to start to look at the 4 different kinds of synovial joints. So again, I don't want persons to mix up in terms of the types or the categories of joints. Again, we have 2 main types of joints. Fixed, that are number 1. And then we have synovial joints, or if you want to say movable joints. So we would have looked at those 2 already in terms of introductory information. So now we are going into detail in terms of the different kinds of synovial joints now. So the first one that we're going to look at is ball and socket. So this type of joint, it is called ball and socket. And the reason why it is called ball and socket joint is simply because this joint is normally formed by 2 bones, where the end of one bone, it look like a socket, and the end of the other bone look like a ball. So the ball basically fit in a socket. That is why it is called a ball and socket joint. So the one that you're seeing now actually represent the shoulder joint. So going around there in this curve, this would actually be the socket. So the socket is actually formed right there, and it is the bone that formed that socket is known as the scapula. So this bone right along there is a bone that is known as the scapula. It is a flat bone that you can feel around the back at the upper section of your back. And this bone now, as you can see, the end of it shaped like a ball, and that is the end of this bone that is called the humerus. So the humerus is that large bone between your elbow and your shoulder. So that is why it is known as a ball and socket joint, because the end of the humerus, it's shaped like a ball, and the end of the scapula, it actually shaped like a socket. Hence, it is called a ball and socket joint. Now, right, so this diagram here, I don't know if you will be able to see it. No. Right, so as you can, so this is the concept for a ball and socket joint. So you have the end of one bone shaped like a socket there, and you can see the ball section for the other bone. So that's why they are known as a ball and socket joint. Now, the fact that now generally persons will know that if you drop or throw a ball on the ground, the ball can roll in different direction because of its shape, because of its oval shape. It can roll in different direction. So it is the same thing with the ball and socket joint. The fact that the end of one bone shaped like a ball simply means that this joint can move in different direction. So that is why you realize that the amount of movement that you can do at your shoulder joint, you cannot do that amount of movement at the knee joint. You cannot do that amount of movement at the elbow joint, simply because the end of those bones there, none of them are shaped like a socket and none are shaped like a ball. So you don't have that whole lot of movement. So only two places on the human body you can find a ball and socket joint. And pointer number one give you those two places, the hip and the shoulder. So those are the only two places on your body that you can find a ball and socket joint. So the joints of the hips and the joints of the shoulders, right, those are the two locations on the human body where you can find a ball and socket joint. Nowhere else. Alright, so the second point I'm now talking about the special feature of this ball and socket joint. We're saying that it allows movement in all directions. See, as a result of that, they call it universal movement. So it allows movement in all different planes. And again, the word planes where it means direction for this topic. Right, so that's a special feature about ball and socket joint, allow movement in all different directions or all different planes. Now, the third point is just giving you an example as to where you find a ball and socket joint, and just giving you the description in terms of the concept where they are saying that the fitting of the humerus. So again, when you look at the labeling, you will realize that this bone, it is known as the humerus. So they are saying that the fitting of the humerus into the cavity of the scapula, which is the shoulder plate, which is the shoulder blade, allows you to swing your arm right around. So they're just basically giving you an example of two bones that form a ball and socket joint. And the two bones that form the ball and socket joint in the shoulder are the humerus and of course the scapula, or if you want to use the term, shoulder blade. Alright, so that's it in terms of ball and socket joint. You have the location as to where you can find it. You have the concept that actually tell you why so much movement can take place. And the concept is that the end of one bone shaped like a ball and the end of the other shaped like a socket, ends the bone that where the end is shaped like a ball, it allow the movement in all different direction. So because of that feature, then we said that the ball and socket joint allow universal movement, meaning that it can move in all different direction. So moving on to another kind of movable joint, or if you want to say synovial joint. So now this one, it is called a hinge joint. So just like the hinges on a door, you realize that a door can only open and close. So you're actually recalling how you can move the hinges, because you remember that the hinges of the door, they are designed in such a way that it can allow movement. So we normally compare this type of joint with the open and closing like a door. So if you move the joint at the elbow joint, you realize that you can open the elbow joint, that is whenever you extend the elbow joint, and you can close the elbow joint, and that is whenever you bend the elbow joint. So that movement is just like a door, open and closing the door. So that's how we normally say that the hinge joint allow movement in one direction, or allow movement in one plane, just like a door, and that is approximately 180 degrees, because a straight line measure 180 degrees, and when you extend the arm at the elbow joint, it basically form a straight line. So places on the human body where you can find hinge joint, the elbow, and of course your knee. Those are examples. Another example where you can find hinge joint on the human body is that middle joint on your fingers. So if you realize the middle joint on your fingers, you can actually bend those joints just like how you can bend the arm or the elbow joint. So the same type of movement that you have at the elbow joint, when you bend the fingers at that middle joint there, you realize that you can open and close them. So those are examples of places on the human body where you can find hinge joint. So thanks to the hinge joint in the knee, footballers can easily run and kick a ball in front of them. So the third point is just giving you an example in terms of the hinge joint at work. Gliding joint. So this is the third kind of synovial joint. So it's a gliding, and basically some textbook, instead of saying gliding, they will actually call it sliding joint, and that is because in order for the bone, in order for movement to take place at this joint, the bones normally slide over each other. So it is actually a sliding movement that take place for movement to take place at this joint. So looking at the diagram, you see some arrows. So basically, when you try to move the elbow joint, you realize that you can move it side to side. You can move the elbow to the right, you can move it to the left. Now that movement is possible because of a sliding motion. So it is a sliding motion that basically cause that movement. So that is why they call it gliding joint. When you glide, if you stand up and just slide one of your foot, that is known as gliding. So that's why it is referred to as gliding joint or sliding joint. So these joints allow bones to glide over each other, giving flexibility in the area. So the bones and basically just slide above each other, slide from left to right or slide from front to back. So that is how it allows movement. So it allows movement in several angles. So we have different angles. So the gliding joint kind of offer more movement than the hinge joint, but not as so much as the ball and socket joint. So are found where there are several small bones, and as I said, the wrist joint, it is made up of approximately 26 different bones. So normally have these small bones just sliding or gliding above each other to allow the movement at that particular joint. So in terms of angles, then the individual can of course change different angles. And the last point that they are giving example of a real life situation where they are saying that thanks to the gliding joint in the hands of bowlers are able to hold and spin the ball in cricket, and batsman can grip the bat. And as for this particular sport, now there need to be some amount of flexibility whenever the bowler is bowling, for example. So that is where the gliding joint is basically come into play. Alright, so the other type of other kind of synovial or movable joint, this one is known as the pivot joint. So one bone stays stationary. That means for this particular joint, one of the bone it don't move none at all, while the other rotates on it. So for example, the neck and the head. So if you realize you can rotate the head, but as for the neck, yes, there's a slight amount of movement, but like how you can move the neck, the head in those different directions, the neck itself cannot. That is simple because the head sits on the neck, so the neck is basically the stationary section there, and then the head region now can rotate. So it is known as pivot joint. That simply means that it, in terms of circle, you don't make a complete circle, but you can move in different direction, left and right, and to the center. Because if you're standing up and you're looking straight, you can put your neck, you can turn the head to your totally to your right. Once you turn your head totally to the right, the opposite now is for you now to turn it in the middle, and then from the middle to the total left, and then again from the total left to the middle, and next you move from the middle, or then head being in a middle position, then to the right. That is what is known as pivot. So pivot mean that yes, you're making a series of movement, but you don't make it in one movement. You actually take it in stages. You take it in part. So that is an example in terms of the movement of your head, meaning that you can move from left to right totally, but you can also move in steps where if your head turn totally to the left and you want to get it to the right, first you move it in the middle, and next you move it from the middle to the right. That is known as pivot joint. Right, so those are the four kinds of movable, are the four kinds of synovial joints. So we have pivot, we have gliding joint, we have hinge joint, and then of course we have the ball and socket joint there. The question, which one are the question? Which question?
So you never found one question from pivot joint.
A question from pivot joint. No, I'm not recalling form a question. No, I'm not recalling calling a question. I might be explaining a concept, but no question for the pivot joint. I never.
Sir, could you go back to features of
Synovial.
yes sir.
Features of synovial joints.
Yeah, I needed to finish right now.
Oh, the last part there. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Right, so we would have now completely different types and the different kinds of joints. So now we're going to look at two important terms that relate or speak to the human skeletal system. We have posture and we have locomotion. Then what I mean by posture is the human body in its correct position. What that means, whenever you're standing, whenever you're sitting, whenever you're walking, whenever you're lifting up load, there's a right and wrong way to do that. Let's say, for example, you see this person standing. Now, in terms of standing, normally they say that if you're standing for extended or for a long period of time, you need to ensure that the body weight is distributed evenly among both legs. That is what they call good posture. If you stand up, for example, and you lean to the side or you lean upon one railing, and your left foot, for example, is bearing most of the weight while the right foot is not bearing none, then they would say that that is called poor posture or bad posture. And what they are saying is that if you constantly do this, then it will strain a particular body part. That is why if you're standing and you mostly stand on one leg, you will realize that after a while you have to switch over the leg, simply because it starts to get tired. So that is known as bad posture. So if you're standing for an extended period of time, they are saying that you must stand, straight, and allow that the weight evenly distributed, which, we all know that that is kind of impossible. But even though we don't do it frequently, they are saying that that is what is known as a good posture. The next image is the person sitting up. As you can see, the person is typing and they are not leaning forward nor they are not leaning backward. What they are saying is that the good posture whenever you're sitting is that you're sitting upright. That simply means your back must straight. So your back must not bend forward, leaning towards the keyboard or the computer screen. Now it should not lean too much backward, meaning that it's like you're lying down. So once those are being done, then that is known as bad posture. So they are saying that once you're typing, so even in class, they are saying that you must draw up the desk close to your chest region, so you actually sit upright and you don't have to bend forward whenever you're writing. That is what they are saying is good posture. So here we have this individual. This individual now is exercising poor posture because he's not sitting upright. As you can see, he's actually leaning forward. So poor posture. So the disadvantage or the negative effect of poor posture is that it can put strain on the muscles and you will lose what is known as muscle tone. So if you're not exercising good posture, you will actually strain the muscle, and once the muscles are strained, then you normally lost what is known as muscle tone. Now muscle tone is basically your muscles in healthy condition, your muscles being strong enough. That is what is known as muscular tone. Alright, the second pointer, high-heeled shoes can cause bad posture while standing. Now you'll realize that persons, whenever they're in a high-heeled shoes versus somebody who's in a flat shoes, now the high-heeled shoes persons, basically because of the heel, the back section of the feet normally raise higher than the front section, which would be the toes. Now what that means is that the muscles of the front region of the human body will basically bear a lot of strain, and persons can also feel some strain in the calf region, that is the back of their foot, but that is the back of their legs. So poor persons who wear high shoes, basically what they are saying, that is poor posture, because a flat shoes will evenly distribute the weight among your feet. But once you're wearing the high heel, most of the weight gonna actually go down on the toes, simply because the back of the of your lower legs will actually be raising upright. So those are examples. So if I should ask you to give me examples of poor posture or persons exercising poor posture, you can say leaning forward while sitting, or you can say wearing high shoes. So those are examples of persons exercising poor posture. So leaning forward while sitting, and wearing high-heeled shoes. Those are examples of persons exercising poor posture. Alright, so we have some different factors that will affect your skeletal system. This one is known as arthritis. So arthritis is basically inflammation of the joint. So inflammation of the joint means swell, means tenderness. That's what the word inflammation mean. This is a deterioration. This is a deterioration of the cartilage covering the bones in the joint. So deterioration means that they are being worn out. So that means that the cartilage them are wear out. So once the cartilage them are wear out, then you will now have swelling at the knee joint, for example. Older person sometimes they have a swell at the joint. And it is simply because the cartilage would have been worn out and the bones them then now literally start to rub against each other. So the people so that individual feeling pain and also swelling occurring at the joint where the arthritis is affecting that individual. Dislocation. Alright, so dislocation. Repeat. I need to repeat something. Alright, so dislocation. Yes, Sparks.
So we should be writing like it's right.
Yes, yes, you can write it. Yes, you can. So where you write, you have this?
So I'm screen time, but when I write.
No, but well, if you don't write it yet, just leave out the space. I mean, I'll write it after. I just want to go through it before 2:25 because the class ends 2:25. Alright, so I just want to finish this. But just get it online. Alright, so dislocation. So normally whenever somebody hand slip out or their knee slip out, rather than saying that their knee slip out or their hand slip out or shoulder slip out, you said that you call it dislocation. So dislocation means that the bones they move out of the correct position or location. And so they are saying that this happens when a bone is forced out of its normal position in the joint cavity. So let's say for example somebody drop on their shoulder, then their shoulder go leak out it or slip out. And with that force that then drop on will basically damage the ligament. So because the ligament damage or tear, then the bone are go fall out of place. And that is what is known as dislocation. Fracture. Now whenever somebody receive a broken bone, so when you say your hand broke or your foot broke, the scientific term is fracture. So but you have two type of fractures. You have complete fracture and you have incomplete fracture. Now whenever the bone totally break in two, that is what is known as complete fracture. And the incomplete one is whenever there is just a crack in the bone. So fractures, this normally take place when you put more pressure on a bone that it cannot stand. So that means it cannot bear that amount of pressure, causing it to crack, split, or break. So let's say for example, you lick up in something hard, then that is too much pressure on the bone, so the bone gonna crack or gonna split or gonna totally break off. Osteoporosis. This is a condition in which the bone matrix is lost and not replaced, resulting in an increased softening and weakening of the bones. Now, repeat. Hello? I heard somebody said something a while ago. So osteoporosis. So let's say for example,
Can I go back one slide with the fracture?
the slide with the fracture.
Sir, you can move on now.
Right, yes. So osteoporosis now, this is whenever the bone lost what is known as matrix. Now, in terms of the bone losing this, then they're gonna become weak. Now, calcium, if you're not consuming or eating enough calcium, then your bones will actually get weak. That simply means that it is losing its matrix component. Now, calcium is basically what makes bone hard. So, a toddler, for example, a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, their bones are much softer than ours. And that is simply because at that particular age, their bones are not developed, and two, they are not consuming or taking enough calcium um, that actually needed for the bones to actually get hard that quickly. So that is why breastfeeding is very important for a young baby, because the milk contains a lot of calcium. So if from that age they are not consuming enough calcium, then the bones will develop extremely weak. So what osteoporosis, it's this condition is whenever it's a condition where the skeletal system not being able to absorb the calcium as how it should absorb it, and because it is not absorbing the calcium, then the bones then get softer, because remember that calcium is what makes bone hard. They normally say that calcium is what give bones its hardness. So if your body don't have enough calcium, basically your bones, they will not be as hard as how they're supposed to be. Rickets, this is an condition that affect the skeletal system. So if you're not eating enough vitamin D, enough calcium, now the bones again, they're gonna be extremely soft. Now, as you can see, the leg, it basically bend. Now the fact that it is soft, that means that it cannot bear the upper body weight. So you're gonna actually crumble and are basically bend. So that's what is the negative effect of not eating enough or consume enough calcium or vitamin D. It causes this condition that is known as rickets, which means that your limbs, they actually grow out of shape. So the legs for this individual is grown out of shape simply because of the softness of those bones, which simply mean that those bones of the lower leg, they cannot bear the weight. And sprain occurs when a ligament is damaged or torn because of excessive force that would have been applied to that part. So you can wring your ankle. So whenever somebody says they wring their ankle, the correct term is sprain. And again, this is whenever you have the ligament being damaged. So damaged ligament can cause sprain, and damaged ligament can cause dislocation. But you mostly get dislocation whenever there's an impact. So that means there's something lick up in you, that you normally get dislocation that way. As for sprain, I mean, you normally walk bad, or you actually ring the foot, if you want to use that term. Right, so basically, I mean, we would have complete another concept in terms of the human skeletal system. Right, so just going or summarizing, as I said, we look at different types of joints. And again, a joint is where two are bone. Yes, man? Which one? Which one? Way down the bottom? Which one? Which slide? What, the sprain? You finish right the sprain?
Yes, sir. Just that I didn't it's one probably the one that says like a door.
Oh, the in joint. Okay. Right, so again, in terms of what would have complete, the two main categories are types of joints. One, fixed, And as I said, we only have one type of fixed joints. You don't need to mix up your brain saying that what are the different types of fixed joints. We only have one type of fixed joint. It is whenever we're looking at movable joints or synovial joints where the confusion will come into play. It is just for you to remember that we have 4 different kinds of synovial joints, and they are ball and socket, hinge, pivot, and of course gliding joint. After looking at that, then we would have looked at things that affect the skeletal system, and that of course would have been poor posture. And again, in terms of you standing, there's a correct way to stand, there's a correct way to sit, right? So you not doing those things correctly, or you not exercising good posture, then you will cause damage or injury to the human skeletal system. And of course, we looked at different things that affect the skeletal system, and those are arthritis, which is a degenerative disease, which means that the human body parts basically getting worn out as you get older. Dislocation, what we normally call hand slip out or knee slip out, and fracture, what we normally call somebody get a broken hand or whichever part of them body you would say break. And osteoporosis is whenever your body not being able to absorb the calcium. Right, so that is it for class today, students. Again, indicate in the WhatsApp group that you are present, because that's where I will take the register from. So have a productive day, and of course you can move on to your next class now.